Let's talk about a law that literally creates families, the Hindu Adoptions and Maintenance Act of 1956. Now, this is about way more than just paperwork. It's a very specific blueprint that decides if an adoption is legally real. So what are the absolute must-haves for a valid adoption? Well, let's dive in and break it all down. You know, the entire law really stands on 4 core requirements. The best way to think about them is as the 4 pillars holding up the whole structure of a legally sound adoption. Everything else we're going to talk about today is built right on top of this foundation from Section 6 of the Act. So here they are, the 4 essential checkpoints. First, is the person adopting legally allowed to? Second, does the person giving the child actually have the authority to do so? Third, is the child themselves even eligible to be adopted? And finally, does the whole process follow all the other nitty-gritty rules? If you can tick yes for all 4, you've got yourself a valid adoption. So, let's start with that very first pillar, the adoptive parent. The law is super specific about who actually has the legal capacity and the right to bring a child into their family. It's not just about wanting to adopt, you have to meet some really clear standards first. Now, what's really interesting here is just how similar the rules are for men and women. For both, the basics are identical. You've got to be of sound mind and you can't be a minor. But the big one, the real key here, is spousal consent. If you're married, the law is crystal clear. You cannot adopt without your spouse's enthusiastic agreement. It frames adoption not as something one person does, but as a decision a couple makes together. And you can see the legal weight of that consent right here in the text of the law. This isn't just a suggestion, it's a hard and fast rule. For anyone who's married, the road to adoption has to be a shared one. The law even goes so far as to say that if a man has more than one wife, he needs the consent of all of them. Of course, you might be wondering, are there any exceptions? And yes, the law does account for some pretty extreme situations. You can get around the spousal consent rule, but only under these very specific, very serious circumstances. We're not talking about a simple disagreement or separation here. We're talking about a spouse who has, for all intents and purposes, completely departed from the marriage and society itself. Okay, so that covers the adopter. Let's move on to our next 2 pillars, which are really 2 sides of the same coin. The child who can be adopted and the person who has the legal right to give that child in adoption. The law creates a very clear chain of authority here, and it's all designed to protect the child. So, who can be adopted under this act? Well, the child has to meet these 4 conditions. They have to be a Hindu, they can't have been adopted before, and they generally have to be unmarried and under 15 years old. Now, what's interesting is the law leaves a little wiggle room, saying that local custom can sometimes allow for exceptions to the age and marriage rules. But these 4 are the starting point. So who gets to make this life-changing decision? The law sets up a really clear pecking order. First and foremost, it's the parents, together. The father and mother have an equal say, and they have to agree. It's only if one parent is completely out of the picture, for those same extreme reasons we saw earlier, that the other parent can act alone. And only if both parents are gone does the authority then pass down to a legal guardian. And this is a hugely important check and balance in the system. When a guardian is the one giving the child an adoption, it's not their decision to make alone. They must go to court and get a judge's permission first. This adds a crucial layer of oversight to protect the child when their parents aren't around to do it. And what is the court looking for in these cases? It all comes down to one guiding principle: the welfare of the child. That is the North Star for any judge in this situation. Before a court signs off on a guardian's request, it has to be absolutely convinced that this adoption is truly what's best for that child. All right, let's move on to our 4th and final pillar. These are what the law calls other conditions. You can basically think of this as the fine print, all the other essential rules in Section 11 that cover key details about family structure and the act of adoption itself. Now, this is a really fascinating rule, probably tied to historical ideas about family lineage. Put simply, you can't adopt a child of the same gender if you already have one in your direct family line. So, if you have a Hindu son or a grandson or even a great-grandson, you can't adopt another son. And the exact same logic applies if you want to adopt a daughter. Okay, what's with this number, 21? This has nothing to do with the age of the person adopting. We already covered that. No, this number is all about the age gap between the parent and the child. The law is very specific about this, and it's likely to make sure there's a clear parent-child dynamic. If it's a cross-gender adoption, there has to be a pretty big age difference. An adoptive father has to be at least 21 years older than his adopted daughter, and an adoptive mother has to be at least 21 years older than her adopted son. This might sound a little obvious, but it's a really important legal point. An adoption can't just be an idea or a piece of paper. There has to be a real, physical act of giving and taking the child. This simple ceremony is what makes the intention real. It's the moment that signifies the child is truly moving from one family to another. And this is a really big one. A common misconception the act clears right up. While many families might choose to have a religious ceremony, like the detta homam, it is absolutely not a legal requirement. The law separates the civil act of adoption from any specific religious custom. The only thing that's legally essential is that physical act of giving and taking, not any particular ritual. So, we've gone through all the details, all the rules, all the pillars. Let's step back for a second. What's the bigger picture here? What's the real spirit behind this 1956 Act? When you look at it all together, a few core ideas really shine through. It really boils down to three things. First, consent. Over and over, the law makes it clear that adoption is a decision made together by spouses and by parents. Second, the child's welfare. This is, without a doubt, the #1 priority, especially whenever a court gets involved. And third, clarity. The law lays out a very clear step-by-step process to make sure every adoption is secure and, most importantly, protects the child at the heart of it all. And that just leaves us with one final thought. This act was truly forward-thinking for 1956, but society and our ideas about what makes a family have changed so much since then. As family structures keep evolving, you have to wonder, what might the next chapter of adoption law need to look like to reflect the families of today and tomorrow? Definitely something to think about.